No, I think I'd like to just move on with the chief and turn it over to him to go over just some of the
Sure.
highlights of the budget and some of the capital purchases that he's hoping to achieve.
Sure. So this is the highlight of my day. I'm halfway through already, but I've been here all morning. So our budget, I'm happy to say, is relatively basic. In terms of our operating budget, there's not a lot that stands out there. Any of the increases that are here are all tied to contractual things, salary and collective bargaining agreements. The rest of it, we're holding tight as long as we can and as best as we can because we understand tax caps become difficult. But also, we've always prided ourselves on doing as much as possible with what we have. So we try to make efficient use of services. The big things for this year are going to be capital purchases. We're continuing to turn over vehicles in our fleet. This year, we're looking for 3 marked cars and 1 unmarked. In past years, we've used one of those spaces for a specialty vehicle. We now won't be looking for a prisoner van, an animal control van, or parking vehicles for several years. The vehicles that we're seeking to replace, all we can go over in more detail later if you want, but just to give you an overview, each of those vehicles has been deemed as unserviceable by the garage here, with the exception of the 1 unmarked car, though that one's north of 130,000 miles and it's 15 years old. So that one's hanging on by a thread. Our other projects are all infrastructure and technology projects for the building. At this point, come February, Verizon is no longer supporting copper lines, and that's what our telephone wires run on. So it is critical that we replace the wiring in our building in order to keep our phone lines up and running, as that is our main source of communication with the public for emergencies. In addition to that, we're looking to turn over our phone system to a fiber optic system, which ultimately, long term, should present some savings to the village. It's a different system than what the village has. We weren't able to join the rest of the village when they did this because the system that went in wasn't functional with our 911 system. So what we have now will function with 911 and allow for all of our data recorders. All of our phone lines are recorded, so the system that we have has to work together with that. The other thing that we need this year, so 2 projects there. One is wiring the building, the other is the phone system itself, but they go hand in hand. The last one is that we need to replace our video surveillance system in the building. That is only the cameras that are mounted to the building, not necessarily body cameras or car cameras or things like that. The system we have now is only capable of recording for, I believe, 7 days, which is it's an unworkable period of time for us in terms of video evidence requirements these days. A new system would allow us to keep that evidence upwards of 6 months, and the equipment we have now, the cameras are failing and they're no longer supported by the vendors that had installed those. So it would also allow that to be stored on our network as opposed to in a standalone DVR that right now sits in the desk area where it's public. So all of this would help us to bring our building up to the standard that we really should be at.
And what's the dollar amount?
Okay. Do you want to go over each of those projects now, or I
Yeah,
sure
why
if you
not?
have a direction?
Talk about
Sure. Let me pull up my capital stuff here. Okay. All right. So for cars, so the amount requested this year was $156,000 for marked cars. That's slightly higher than what we would have had in past years, but those now include the computers. In past years, we were taking the tablet computers inside of the car and some of that equipment, and it was being placed into other operational lines. This year, that's attached in there, and those are all on state bid, both the computers and the cars themselves. Uh, Unmarked car at $40,000. So those are relatively standard. Um, the other capital projects are listed just down below. So the video surveillance system, $35,000 is based off of quotes that we'd gotten from a couple of local businesses. Again, that's going to be on state contract, so there are some finer points to it as far as specs and things like that that still may need to be looked at. But overall, that's the price for the project that we've got so far.
Let me catch up. Are
Sure,
you looking under the capital projects
I
right
am.
now?
Yeah.
Page 7.
So we have 4 projects listed there. The cars, which are separated out, marked and unmarked, but generally we consider as one thing. And then the video surveillance system, the VoIP telephone cabling, which allows us to put data drops to each of the workstations in our building, um, which is necessary for that phone system to operate. And then the VoIP system itself, which is a one-time, both of those being one-time costs.
Page 4 and page 7.
Yeah, It's under vehicles and heavy equipment. Page 4 is where the vehicles are.
You have them on different pages, Tom, because the page from what I printed from the proposed budget, I have them all together.
The only difference is that
Okay.
this page,
Which one?
I think Andy had put let's see,
Oh, about this. Yeah.
the HVAC.
Yep. It's on this page, I think. Yep. Sure.
How are you doing with your budget for this year in terms of expenditure and
This year we're looking very good. I expect to be under budget in just about everything. We have more money left over than we had planned to have at this point, but we had put some projects off because of some aging equipment that we were looking to replace, and we're trying to see how much life we can get out of things. So we always try and wait as long as possible to see if something will go. Some of the things are portable radios, which are unsupported now, so if we have to replace those, they become very expensive. But that's a larger capital project that we're hoping to put off for at least 2 more years. But that said, some of the equipment lines and things like that, if we have to replace radios, they become expensive. So we're good in all of our lines. Our overtime line this year is going to be maxed out or maybe a touch over, but that's if that at all is over, that'll be a function of in our 100 line we're under by 4 positions right now. So 3 patrol officers, and we didn't fill the captain's position, which I'm anxious to fill, but would be wouldn't be functional until we can hire the police officers to backfill, because ultimately the patrol function is the bread and butter of our police department. We have to have that first. So if we take everybody off the street to do administrative work, there's nobody left to be the police officers. So that position remains open. I desperately could use it, but we can't have anything until we have patrol officers.
yeah, but isn't the salary lines encumbered? You know, I mean, in other words, we budget every year to pay for all the positions that we have open, and then at the end of the year, there's residual monies, right?
Right, so
right?
there's-
But then there's all your operational costs and everything else.
Right.
So
Right. So my point is just that ordinarily, I'm very careful not to go over the overtime line, because that's always it's always a careful discussion with us here, and I have a lot of respect for the fact that I'm given an overtime line that allows me to be functional, particularly with the town contract going on. But one of the blocks to us being able to hire this year has been that when we signed that town contract, we were committed to being able to have a list that included both the town and the village. To this point, the county has refused to allow us to do that. Stuart and I, and now Debbie, have been working on this, and we see that there's a light at the end of the tunnel. There is a path to success here, but that's held us up for some hiring. So we're in a position we didn't predict to be in, but it's something that's been outside of our control so far.
How many sworn officers are you budgeted to have?
Budgeted for 61,
How many do you have right now?
57.
When we're reviewing the number of staff members in each department, we have 70 listed for the police department, so does that mean there's 9?
That includes civilian employees.
ACA?
That's civilian staff, yes.
Franklin?
That would sure, that would be my assistant and the dispatchers and the records clerk. And then I'm unsure how we have building staff at this point, because some of them were partial on our budget and partial others. Okay.
So one of the things that we discussed last night that's going to be new in the police department is you're going to be taking over all of the functions when it comes to parking. That's the intention. But you're not asking for more staff to do that. Can you tell us more about how you expect that process to look?
Okay, so sure, we hadn't talked about that particularly, but look, we're ready for it. We talked about this a few years ago in terms of how parking should go, and it really is, the officers are there enforcing it. We're now repairing the meters. It's a centralized thing. It should make things easier. People should have one place to go to handle things. As I started with, we try to do more with less every single day, and we pride ourselves on being efficient. We'll make it work. Could there come a time where this becomes really busy? I mean, we've seen parking violations bureaus in other municipalities that have really boomed, and there could come a time where it requires more staff. I would say that the only time that you require more staff is when the revenue dictates that you're making the money to expand your program. So for right now, we've got an enthusiastic staff that does a fantastic job, and we can handle it.
A lot of it's going to be online. And then when we met with a purveyor for the new meters and things like that, there's a lot of statistics that they'll be able to pull off of there to really give them day-to-day knowledge of exactly what's happening and where people are. And then if it ties in with their plate reader, that's going to be.
The idea is that if we use technology to limit the administrative side of things, it's really a management function as opposed to clerical work that's being done. If we don't have people lined up to get permits in the door, then there's not necessarily more work to be done that way. It's more of a managing the program, and we've got some people that are fantastic for that.
I was just gonna say that the whole parking issue involves so many people in the community, and people that visit and shop and all that and stay overnight. And every municipality, as you drive to Westchester, is just a little bit different, just enough to mess you up. Um, so how we communicate all of this to the public actually becomes really important, because this is when people get really angry and frustrated. Government officials and the police department is not understanding something as simple as parking, because there's no consistency anywhere around here. But from municipality to
Oh.
municipality, you're shopping in Mamaroneck, you're visiting, going to a restaurant, their hours, their meters, their system. You go to White Plains, and you come to Ossining, and you think, oh, it's 6 o'clock, it's 8 o'clock, it's this, it's that, I mean, people get crazy. So I'm just suggesting this is one of those, like, I don't actually understand all of this. And if I can't really articulate, I'm sure anybody listening to this. So we've got to be really good about informing the public about this very specific. Any changes we make, where people pay, how they pay, grace periods, hours that are changed. There are a lot of places in California that are moving to an Uber model, which is you pay for parking based on supply and demand. So you pay more during the day because you're in a store area, and you pay less at night. And some allow you to park overnight, but you got to be out of there by 6 a.m., not by 7 or 8, like other cities have. And the only reason people get angry is not understanding. I won't even get into New York City and all the jokes made about 72 signs on every pole explaining what you can do. I'm talking just basic, because this is a real winner if it's communicated well. It's a real loser if it's not. So I'm just putting it out there now, because I don't even get what we're actually doing and what we're improving. And I'm not asking you to explain it all now, but I'm just
No, but just something to
saying
offer.
this is very important.
In our conversations, some of the stuff that we've talked about is that the concept of parking overall needs to be rethought. As far as this overnight parking exemption program is a beast. It's a big
Yep.
deal. But there may be a better way to do it. As far as on-street parking, even the hours. We've discussed going to the businesses and finding out, look, is 2 hours working for you, or maybe you need more, or maybe different lots need to be used for different purposes. So, this is a good opportunity for us to evaluate the entire program and look at it as a whole and see how they all different. Because overnight parking interacts directly with how people park on the street in the morning. I go out regularly, and there's people moving their cars from one lot to another because this permit expires, now I have to be over there, or now I have to be out of this lot, now I have to go to a meter. Some of that's just inefficiency in the way that it's set up, but that's not because it was necessarily done wrong in the past. It's just that things have changed. And as far as communicating things to people, I like to think that's one of our specialties. So I think we can really do something special with it. The hardest part about parking is that it tends to be a negative thing to talk about. There's a lot of enforcement that goes along with it, and people don't like it. Everybody wants a free parking spot, but nobody wants to get the ticket when they overstay. So there is some strategy going to be involved in it, but I think this is
who's helping you with that piece? Are you guys doing it all
With
through
which?
the police department? Is there a committee, a task force,
I
or
mean,
something?
let me just remind everybody, the DRWC, parking was a big one of their priorities, and they had a lot of recommendations, and I don't know how much that was considered in the moving forward with this plan.
A lot of it, actually. I think that to answer your question about a committee, just the fact that, working with the chief, we both have the very same philosophy of simple is better, and consolidating these operations so that the customers don't have to, well, am I supposed to get my permit at the clerk's office? Am I supposed to get it at the finance office? When do I go to the police station? I mean, this makes no sense. So, consolidating that into one location and then making it easier for people to do it online is part of just our internal operational review. As far as what the parking should be, as far as how long and how much, I've actually reached out to the committee that was the specialty parking subcommittee of the
Right.
DRWC. And then we want to bring the businesses in and have a discussion about, what they think is really recommended as far as length of time and the amount of money and where can you park. And also Tracy has, now that she has her GIS system up and running, has mapped out our laws as far as where can you park and where can't you park. And I think that's going to be a real value in that discussion because, we're going to be able to say, well, does it even make sense for us to restrict parking on these streets? And it'll just be part of the conversation. So there's really two parts to this. One is just operationally and equipment, and then the other is, how much do we charge and how long do you get to stay?
Because in the 2018 budget, we budgeted how much money? It was $40,000 or $60,000 to do a parking
It
study.
was 60.
Okay, so now you've met with vendors for what parking meter system we want, and I'm just wondering, now it sounds like you're talking about doing a study and making all of those thoughtful considerations about how we want to do parking. But
But I
is
don't
that
know
what we're doing first?
But the chief and I talked about, we don't think we need to hire anybody to do that. I think that we can do that ourselves. So I don't think we have to spend $60,000 on a consultant to come in, right? Because we're pretty smart people and we can figure it out. It's just we got to get the right equipment and the right tools so that the customers can get their permits and then figure all the rest of it out. So, and now that Tracy's on board, we really feel that the three of us are going to be able to get together and figure this out with this committee. Especially like the downtown people and people that live there, making sure that they're involved because where do they park at night? I mean, it'll be a bigger project, but
Okay, just
I think we're on the right
yeah.
track.
It's not an argument. I'm just saying
Yeah.
this could be great. We've been talking about it for a long time. So let's make it great. Let's not make it problematic because we didn't talk to the right people. And don't forget, you got to go all the way up to Roosevelt Square,
Absolutely.
whatever that we
Yeah.
can't keep forgetting the upper.
Well, I think
Croton.
that, when we talked about parking, there's the issues of parking downtown, then
Yep.
there's the issues of parking throughout the neighborhood. So Tom provided a list to Tracy who mapped it on our GIS. We have 1,500 on-street parking exemptions for overnight parking. And when you really look at where those are coming from, it asks us very big questions about what? Like,
Yeah.
Why
because-
are there 8
because
parking
now we're
permits all
getting
for this two-family home?
one of your
Yeah.
friends, she continually calls me and she says, I can't find a place to park. I'm walking a half a mile to get to my house.
Right.
Well, I think we have to really, that's part of the conversation is we have to really look at where we're mapping and what are we allowing as far as an address and how many permits per address and things like that. I mean, now is the year to do the deep dive analysis on all that stuff and make it right. But we got a great team now because the chief knows what he sees, and we've got now GIS and planning and mapping, and I just think that we can put this together and it'll be really nice for 19.
Yeah, I don't think we've had the internal staff to really drive this process in the past where and the type of coordination that's being discussed right now. I'm very very encouraged by what you've talked about and the folks that we have in the different areas to make this happen. So
Were you gonna say something?
I was. I mean, your question kind of highlighted, what happens with a study, but that kind of got answered. It's being done internally, and that's always actually a lot better because we have full control and say over our own community. So, in my understanding of a parking analysis and/or study with the planning department and also an economic, development person, because it's not just public safety manager and planning, right? But is usually, from my understanding, and I may be wrong, implementation and or upgrades of infrastructure is done after the analysis is complete, because that may dictate a complete change on even how you do infrastructure for parking. You may not even do meters, right? So I guess that was just the only disconnect that I just had.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. I'm sorry. Did I?
No, the only question is, are you doing meters or base?
So
Thanks.
yeah, okay.
Well, it's going to require a little bit of both
Okay.
because the idea is that banks are good for a certain number of parking spots at a time, generally 8 to 10 spots at a time. There are areas where that's not functional.
Right.
So where you've got linear space up here on Croton Avenue, or maybe there's only 3 spots on a corner somewhere, you're not going to put a bank that's very expensive. You'd put individual meter heads. But what we're looking for is that all of those would operate the same. So you could still pay by phone, you can still pay with credit card. We want all that functionality in all of them, and then everything's digital, so it would work with the license plate readers and make it fast. You're driving around, you're getting alerts as to where people are over. You go there, you hit it off. So I don't particularly care for the individual meter heads, but there's a function for them in a lot of places. The banks are really something that we sort of deserve in our downtown, and eliminating some of the poles and the signage from that stuff would really be great to open things up a little bit. So the banks,
Meters that we looked at are also multi-language.
Yeah, they all are. Is that your
Yes,
question?
answer my question. Not to get into the details, but I just want to say that Peak Skill, when you pay by credit card, you automatically
so it's the same vendor.
okay.
Yeah.
You automatically pay what?
You automatically pay it out. Yeah. So instead of like a quarter, they say, hey, if you're gonna use a credit card, whether you need an hour or not, that's what you get.
So there are all kinds of settings you can put in there. That's to encourage people not to underfeed the meter. I think it's generally easier to pay $1 than it is to pay the 15 for the overtime charge. But we haven't gotten to pricing and stuff like that yet, and there's a lot of complications to that. But the vendor that we had met with is the same one who services Peekskill.
It actually makes more sense. So I'm switching topics from parking. And the advantage of the budget process is to actually do like an annual like druthers list. So I'm still not seeing, from my perspective, enough foot patrol in on the streets in downtown and Upper Croton. I just don't see the police walking up and down, which I think will prevent some crime, some minor stuff, because so many of the things you need to go after people, the police have to see themselves. It's unfortunate that even in this day and age, you can't take a picture, put a time clock on it, and send to police, which would be a nicer way to do stuff. But the laws actually oftentimes state that you have to see things, right? So it's hard to look at a budget and account for that. But there's got to, our downtown is growing.
No, you're right.
What's just not seeing it?
What's shortened that up a little bit this year is that we've had a lot of traffic complaints, and then we've had some traffic incidents. And there are times when we just focus on one thing over another. And because of the issues we've had with traffic this year, and being a little bit short staffed, because usually we use those the foot posts as are usually done with extra staffing, because when you have a call somewhere far away, if somebody's on foot, they're just not going to get there. So usually we staff our regular posts first, and the walking people are extra. This year we've been focusing some of that energy on traffic stuff, just because of the amount of calls we've had and different things, and people asking for specialty things, evaluation of different areas and stuff like that. But I understand, and it's something that we'll focus on during the holiday season.
Or get different technology to move them around so they're not physically walking, like the little, what they're using in cities and stuff.
You want me to add? You want me to add a line in for
I'm
segues?
just telling you.
No, we
that
actually we're.
we would prevent the lighting on the trees actually help.
It does.
Because it lights up. We should move it farther up Croton to those other businesses. When you have a growing environment of mixed-use buildings, residence, and business, if you only had business, fine. If you only had residence, the complication is, and it's 7 days a week. I mean, you go on Sunday morning, you got a lot of people now walking around. I know it's winter time, so it's going to be a little different. We've talked about it for 3 years. I just don't see don't see the cops walking. That's
The answer to
all I'm
mobility
saying.
is that we've had bike patrols for many years. We went through a time where we had a lot of new officers that we didn't have the opportunity to send them to schools. We put 3 or 4 officers through that school this year. I'm looking for 3 or 4 more next year. We're buying 2 new bikes right now, probably 2 new ones next year, because our bikes, the bicycles that we have right now, were old when I got hired. So they're 20 years old, most of those bikes. They're breaking down and they're expensive to repair compared to what it is to just buy a new bicycle, and they cost more than you'd think. But nonetheless, the bikes is usually the answer to mobility, so we're going to put them out more. They're generally available to ride until the snow's on the ground. So, I guess not today. We won't be riding, but in general, we'll get more foot patrols out.
Before we leave this topic, I just want to. So, I don't know what the methods are to achieve that goal, but that's a goal that we have heard again and again, is to have more visibility. Cops walking in high visibility neighborhoods. I don't know that Segways is the solution, and I understand that when you have extra staff, that you get to just you have to decide what is the priority on how they're being dedicated. But if, I mean, Rika's not the only one that has said for years, we'd like to see more visibility of people walking around particular times of the week. If your department doesn't agree that that's necessary to maintain as a priority for having the level of safety that you feel is necessary for you to accomplish your public safety goals, that's one thing. If you agree that that's a priority that you're hearing from board members and to achieve it, is there something else that you need to be able to achieve it?
So I think that there's maybe a miscommunication here. So in other words, what I'm saying is not that we don't have officers walking. I think that one of the things that often happens is at the times that they do walk or the places they walk, you may not be seeing them. I can tell you that when Reggie Bush was complaining about parking in front of his driveway, we had officers standing out there every single day. It may not be somewhere that you drive on a frequent basis and maybe you didn't see them. I can tell you that they're parking downtown and they're walking around Broad Avenue almost daily. Maybe not for a full 8 hours, but we're signing them out there to walk, to get out of the car and walk around. They're on Main Street. I walk Main Street myself. I'm agreeing that, especially during the holiday season or when we have more stuff going on downtown, we could be a better presence there. So I don't think it's necessarily that there's some resource that we need. It's a management issue. I should be making sure that the cops are getting out of the car. It's not just about assigning individual officers to just walk and do nothing else. It's about taking the officers that are on the road and making sure that they're getting out of the car. For me, that means the sergeants and lieutenants and myself included not only need to be doing those same things, but following up with the business owners to say, hey, have you seen the cops in here? It's easy to say I get my coffee in this shop, but I have to stop in the others also. So it's a workable problem.
I like that answer because that's a staff training thing. That's
Sure.
having people use their shift differently.
Absolutely.
Are you allowed? They can't ticket, but are you allowed to use citizen groups that are trained to also walk in downtowns to look for problems to call them in? I mean, is there?
So we have an auxiliary force that comes out for various events. As far as things, I think what you're describing sort of sounds like a neighborhood watch. We don't generally have things like that, and there are problems inherent and stuff like that.
I know.
In sort of empowering
They
people to
work
do
better
things.
and worse. They sometimes are a real problem.
Our strategy is to encourage everyone to just call when you see something. Not necessarily to formally designate people as watch posts, but just to encourage people to be calling us anytime they see something unusual or never. Look, the apathy is the big problem that police departments face. Here, I like to think we're a little bit better than a lot of other places, but in a lot of places, people feel like I'll call and nothing's going to get done or nothing will happen. So that's the uphill battle, is to make sure that people feel like if I call because I see something going wrong, that in fact an officer's going to come and something will be done about it. So
I don't think you're not reacting to me.
I understand.
Just making it a statement because it's something that is one of the big complaints. And I get the challenge. And I think if we weren't on the side of a cliff, it probably would be easier to walk and see people. But it's like, since I've been a trustee, and I'm sure before that, it's just a continuous, ongoing issue that needs to be attended to. That's all. When we have fairs, lots of cops there. Walking around. I got to tell you, when I go to the Arcadian, there's always they walk through CVS. I mean, not for themselves. They're
right.
Actually like running around, but
that's good. They're supposed to be in the pharmacies every single one, every single day.
No,
so
it's a good thing.
glad to hear they're there.
And I've seen them like on Saturday. I don't know who he was, but he's walking around saying hello to people. He's not there for himself. He's there working. It's fine. But they're just the sidewalks of Croton and just walking around, not talking to everybody for half an hour, but walking around saying hello, moving on, is a presence I also think in the evenings would prevent crime and all sorts of other behaviors. So I've already made my point. I just don't know where. Like, I'd just like to see some metrics on it or something, because it's just it would be better if we had more of it.
Okay.
So was your comment particularly for Croton Avenue, or?
My comment is all over areas in the village that need attending, which they know pretty well.
But good policing is out of the car, and it's talking to people, and it's being involved. We know that. So we can always be doing more of it.
Were you about to say something? I think I went back to this conversation.
No. Good, thank you.
Yeah, sure. Nanny. I am acknowledging you and inviting you to ask the question. So.
Thank you. So I want to thank you, Chief, because I know that you're taking a big portion of. So I want to kind of go back to parking, I guess. And yes, correct. That issue is being an ongoing issue. So I want to thank you for taking over that, and I want to thank you to not looking at this an opportunity to add an additional staff to your department. So which is great. So I guess the question that I have is more like, being part of this process before, and we always like to talk about big pictures, budget wise. And I'm not just talking about the department that is in front of us right now, but just talking about general. So we talk about this. So what is the implementation and how long is that going to take? What is the meters that you guys are looking at? What is the time frame that the village manager is looking into it? I'm assuming again January 1st. That's when you're going to start with the new overnight permits. Again, that's an assumption that I'm taking. I don't know what the transition is. How long is that going to take place? Because if that's going to take place, how do we communicate into the community? So if I come over here to the treasurer's office and be like, I'm filling this out, and you're going to tell me, no, you cannot do this. Now I have to go to the police department. So how does that being communicated to the community? What is the time frame that you guys are looking into do this? And what is the time frame that you see you looked at the vendors for meters? So what does that mean for the community itself?
That's a great question, the whole implementation. So we have some information we have to get back to the vendor for them to give us a price on all of the equipment. We would then talk with them about how they can install them. We are getting into the winter, and so that's going to be a little more difficult. We may want to wait till spring before we install them because they do have to be mounted on bases, and I mean there's things that have to be installed, and it's really difficult in the winter. So the software can only be implemented for this system if we have the meters in place, because it all goes together. My expectation is I don't like to wait on things, so we want to get it done as quickly as possible. Realistically, though, I would say spring is when it'll be rolled out and implemented. With that would come a whole public campaign through the resources that we have in the chief's office. And then there's going to be a period where people can still come in here and do it because it's a web-based and anybody can plug it in. So if they came into finance, then finance can help them while they're there and then say the next time that you need this, you can go online and here's the resources. If they go into the clerk's office, same thing.
I'm
So
sorry.
it's an
So are we
educational.
talking about the parking meters, or are we talking about the overnight parking at this point?
It's all the
Because-
same.
So okay, so that's
It's all the
what I
same.
think. I think
Yes.
part of that, so it goes back to your area. So now, what are the hours of operation? Is it going to be very similar to what we have right now? So again, that's part of
Hours
think that
operation for what?
operation for me to get
For
a
taking parking
permit.
permits?
Yes.
The idea is that the majority of it would be able to be done online, and that would be 24 hours a day. That's the idea, is to thin it out. From there, it would generally be business hours, but even when we post hours for things, we generally don't hold to that. If there's somebody available
Yes.
to help you, we go beyond. If you come in for reports and records is closed, somebody will help you find your report. So that's why I like doing things out of our building, because we have the availability to go past business hours.
So if I go on a Saturday, that should not be an issue.
I mean, we still have to talk to the vendor to see what the logistics are of doing those things, but I don't
Totally
see why
understand that. Because the perception
not. The
that was-
intention is to
Correct.
expand services,
the,
not
the
to.
perception that was yesterday was when the village manager presented this. She said, the police department is 24/7, and I just don't want people to think
Sure.
that they can go there at midnight and expect to get all this stuff done. That's what my concern will be.
The
To
objective-
me,
The objective is to expand access to things as much as possible.
Correct.
With what's available. If that's 24 hours and we can do that, then we'll do it 24 hours. If there's some reason that it can't be 24 hours, it'll be as many hours as possible. I don't expect too many people coming in between 11
Not at
p.m.
all.
and 7 a.m. for parking permits, although it's possible.
You never know.
But some of the other things that,
But-
that are in place right
Correct.
now, or you have individual night exemptions for things like an emergency, I'm visiting somebody, things like that. So there's already mechanisms in place, and again, that would be available online.
I
and by
just,
phone.
again, my concern is not really the implementation, because I know your department will be able to handle that. My concern is the communication to the public. How are we going to do this? Because right now we're talking about 3 months, 3 years of time. So I think that's the part that the village manager needs to kind of arrange that more
Absolutely.
than the police department. So that's one of. And I have more stuff.
We'll roll it out as a campaign, and then people will see the transition because they'll see the meters coming out and new meters going in. So they'll know that something's going on.
Um,
And the businesses will help us.
yeah, I kind of view this as a 3-phase program. I mean, so our internal departments are currently working on on the planning and finalizing the planning. Then we would do the installation, and then that would follow by our campaign, or however we want to call it,
Right.
with our residents and business community. But as far as those who are watching, I think the easiest way to say is that there is no don't expect, unless I'm wrong, any particular launch of a program to be done before the end of the year. It's still in a planning phase internally in the departments.
No critical change. Nobody's going to lose
Yeah.
services or find themselves short on something. No.
Yeah, and I mean we haven't even been briefed on the final program, so and that will also be done in a public setting as well. So
It's
And you'll get that
exciting. I mean, this is something, it's a win. So
Is there anything else that we
I
should be
do.
covering?
I had one. So I have a marine line in here,
Yes, I saw that.
Oh, yeah.
and fuel had been reduced from what we had requested. And I'm only assuming that that's based on low usage this year. Again, like a foot post, that was because of short staffing this year. That's proportionately reimbursed by the state. So I would only ask that that fuel line be restored to what it was. I believe the original was $21.70, and I think it was reduced to $1,000.
Can you tell me what page you're looking at?
I'm gonna
what do you
find
mean
it in a second.
proportionally reimbursed? What does
So
that mean?
when you put officers out on the Hudson River, there's a New York State program where they'll reimburse after you've exceeded a certain number of hours. So generally, we try to fulfill that number every year so that we can get half of that reimbursed back.
Is that in your capital budget sheet?
No, I believe that
This
was
is on the
on an
units,
operation
page
line.
15.
It's the 3350, I think, Tom. 3389.
Which one, Tom?
Page 13.
Tell him. Tom can't hear you because you're not speaking into the mic.
It's the 3389 budget on the 15-page handout that came with your new notebooks this morning. It's on page 13.
So it
What?
went from 13.6 to 12.
Okay, so page 13 of 15, unleaded fuel. Is that what I'm looking
Yes.
Yes. So the last copy I had, and I don't have the same one that you may be looking at now, but my 2019 requested was 2170, and the 2019 recommended was 1000, according to the one I have.
at? We don't actually. This actually doesn't show the 2019 requested. It only shows the 2019 recommended. So thank you for pointing that out because we
Okay.
wouldn't have known if we requested more.
Look, it's a relatively minor issue, but it allows us to put those officers out, and the fuel isn't necessarily reimbursed, but the staffing that goes out is. So where we can do it on straight time, we will, and it actually reimburses the staff that's existing.
Your fuel is reimbursed.
So the fuel is reimbursed as well. Okay, I'm sorry.
So
what number are you looking for?
I'd like to go back to the 2170. That's what we had for 18. So it would just remain the same as what we had, no increase, but no decrease either,
So are there bills that are outstanding because we've only spent year to date 846?
because we didn't have staff to go out this year. Being
Oh.
4 officers shorthanded, and then having traffic things and school things and all the other details that we attended to this year, it was just a short year for us on the
Gotcha.
river.
So, help me understand. There are particular instances that I'm aware of when our police officers have gone out on the Marine unit and really important life-saving safety experiences. And I assume that if there were if there were an incident where it would really, it was going to make a life or death difference or a big safety difference, we would send somebody out and just figure it out.
That's
There's
right.
No traffic detail today, whatever. So why were we able to not go out as much this year? I guess so I'm just understanding. So if there's a big safety issue, you're going to find somebody to go out. So what are the other instances when you think it's important or beneficial to have people out on the Marine unit?
Sure. So just to understand how it works in terms of an emergency. Right now, working this morning, Officer Rizzi's here, Lieutenant Montague are here. There may be other officers that are Marine qualified as pilots or crew members. If an emergency happens right now and we're at minimum staffing, they're going to go. The rest of the sectors are going to cross and backfill, and they're going to do what they have to do to cover until those officers come back in. If it looks like they're going to be out for a while, we'll call somebody in from home to backfill their sectors. on a general day where we're sending the boat out for patrol, that would be where we have extra staff. We wouldn't shortchange any of the sectors in order to patrol the river. When we're out on patrol, depending on the season, there's different things. We make a concerted effort early in the season to make sure that everybody has life vests on, particularly in that March and April time when people are out fishing, the early season, because that's where we've had our most critical. Sorry, I'm losing my voice here. Our most critical incidents where if somebody goes overboard, they have a very, very short period of time for rescue before survival is not always possible. So we're patrolling for that during those seasons. As we go throughout the rest of the year, we're looking for boating while intoxicated. We're looking for other dangerous, reckless behavior, speeding up and down the river, boating in dangerous areas, people in the channel where there's larger ships that come through. We also do details with the Coast Guard to checking for permits and such. So oftentimes we need their assistance with that because they really are the specialists. But we'll have them on board our boat to work with them. Something I'd like to see in the future, I would love to see a shared mission between the fire department, the ambulance corps, and the police department. And if there were to come a time where we were to replace our aging boat, not this year, but perhaps next or in the future, it would be really great to see something like that. I don't think it's done anywhere else in Westchester County, or maybe not even on the Hudson River. But I would love to see a shared boat among the three services and something that would really be functional to provide all of that service. Right now, we have paramedics assigned to the boat. So oftentimes, if we have officers to go out, we'll take somebody from OVAC with us. They adjust their staffing to accommodate. But it would be great if we had something that was a shared service and all the equipment for everybody. For right now, I just need a little more gas.
So I have a quick question for you though. Training school and education. So we spent very little, but we have 2,500. So we're really close to the tax cap right now.
Mhm.
So if we add more money into the fuel, can we deduct some money from the training?
Generally, that's meant to send people to be pilots, and I wasn't expecting to have a deduction, so I don't know how many people, if any, we would need to send next year. I can check and get back to you on it.
That'd be great.
My only question was, when it comes to the state reimbursement, does that also count when you guys go on training on the water?
That's right.
Okay.
Not necessarily for the training schools. When they go, so when the training school for this is in Lake George, so their lodging is paid for by the state, and I believe the school is paid for, but there's no salary reimbursement on that portion. But those are limited time, and it's a training school that we send people to. As far as where we're sending the boat out here for in-service training on our time, that would be included.
Oh,
Yes.
perfect. Okay, cool.
Is there as we're looking and we're looking at not just the tax cap, how close to the tax cap are we in your proposed budget? Because it's
Oh, you know what? The last page of the tentative budget actually has the property tax cap calculation.
other items.
Yeah, the very, very last page is the property tax cap calculation. And it looks like the very bottom line says difference between tax levy limit and proposed levy is 0. So that would mean that we're at the tax cap.
The proposed budget,
So
is that the
everything
tax
we
cap?
add, we have to do a reduction somewhere else.
So they budgeted right to the limit.
And still, it's
And that's why it was like less than 0.25% tax increase,
because we have almost no tax cap allowable this year.
because we're right up against the tax cap.
Why is it so?
I'll verify that with Dale when she comes.
We can have more of a conversation about that because
Right.
that's unusual. But that does bring up the question: are there some of these items that you're looking to purchase that are currently in the recommended 2019 budget that we could be using unexpended funds from 2018 to take them out of the 2019?
Yes, and I'd mentioned that to Tom before because as I'd started with all the vacancies we have, my 31-2100 line, the staffing is going to have some money left over in there. A small portion may need to cover the overtime over expenditure, but I don't expect that to be significant. So I think that we can definitely pay for a good portion of what we're looking for in capital on that line. Yes.
More than the 1,700 or
Above and beyond the gas for the boat. Yes, I think we.
$770 or whatever. that
Yeah.
we're looking at.
Yeah, I don't think. And look, we may be able to move something around, or maybe we'll just forego training more boat pilots next year, depending on what need is. So I don't really see that as a crippling issue. But yeah, I think the capital projects, it would be great to get some of those lined up sooner than later. And if we're permitted to do that with the money that's left over in the 2018 operating budget, that would be fantastic.
I think that's gonna be one of the big conversations we're having by the end of today and on Mondays.
Yes.
What are all the unexpended funds and what can maybe be taking out of 2019 and taking care of 2018?
Given your staffing challenges, with the list and everything, do you actually foresee yourself actually filling the captain's position this year or
Yes.
next year?
Yeah, so like I said before, the challenge to that is, I mean, I'm anxious to have that. There's some real need for that. The issue is that what do I do with all administrative staff and nobody out doing the walking and doing the traffic enforcement, doing those things? So, I mean, I'm anxious to get those patrol spots filled so that I can do these other and make these other moves. But ultimately, I have to have those patrol officers first.
And you spoke about the light at the end of the tunnel. When do you kind of see yourself working it out with the county as far as
Debbie, you said you met with them, right? So
So currently, I had an opportunity to go and meet with the Westchester County Civil Service, and it was a really great meeting with senior staff and the folks that actually directly work with us. Catherine Borgia was with us, their attorney was with us, and they agree that the philosophy that the chief is asking for is something that is reasonable, and so they are lobbying on our behalf at the state level, because in the law right now it doesn't allow us to do that, but they're trying to see what can be done legally to assist us.
I don't think it
And-
requires new legislation. I think it requires people just admit that the legislation that's there allows us to do exactly what it is we're looking for. We'd spoke to New York State before we spoke to Westchester County, and they were very clear on it and said, as soon as county says go, go. So it's probably going to need some prodding along, and it may need some help from the board. But
we just sent that. They wanted a copy of the IMA agreement to show that we do police services for the town, so that it shows that we're sort of a joint jurisdiction. So we sent that off last week, and we'll hear back.
as far as a time frame, it's as fast as bureaucracy likes to go.
Yeah,
So,
that's
yeah,
what I'm,
you
that's
know,
what I'm over
I'm
here like.
listen, I like to think of myself as a pretty determined person, so it's not something I'm going to put on the back burner and wait until somebody finds out. They're going to get follow up from me until we get an answer on this. So I think that
So if where you're going is, can we adjust the amount that's budgeted for salaries? Because we know these people are not gonna be getting paid January 1st. That might be.
well, we don't know that. I mean, the thing is that where my staffing's at right now, and we're so far behind that if I can get these people, even if they can't get into the academy on January 7th, we'll take them and start in service training them, and so that we can cut out maybe some of the time after they get out of the
So-
academy.
So theoretically, we could get a letter tomorrow from the Westchester County.
If we got a letter tomorrow, I can fit them in for a January academy.
We don't have to.
It'll be
interview
it'll be
people
tight.
or
Well, we would
make a
have
list
we
and-
would have to, but and the time frame still would work. There's still departments that are canvassing right now.
For the January
Yes.
academy. All right.
Wasn't my understanding that, and I actually agree with Chief. I don't think it's that big of a deal. They should just, address the issue but my understanding was that it would have to wait until they're back in session in Albany to just get state approval. But if that's a way if there's a way that it could be done beforehand, I trust that process, and that's good news.
But I do believe that's what they're trying to do, because there's a common sense factor here that they realize if the state is advocating for shared services, then that's going to change some of the modeling for civil service. And I think that we might
So
be right in there.
when are they back in session?
Well, we don't even know if that's going to be
Well,
necessary. That's what
so
I'm saying.
here's the issue. Right now, the New York State law says, and I'm going to paraphrase here because I don't have it in front of me, that your list can be based off of the appointing municipality, and any adjoining municipality, the entire county, your county and adjoining counties, including, I believe, going into Fairfield County if you're on a border, that you can take the entire state. So our municipality and an adjoining would be the town of Ossining. The only difference between what's written in state law and the county rule is according to the Commissioner of Human Resources. So when we called New York State, and I have the notes on my desktop for who we spoke to and when, they said, sure, as soon as the commissioner says okay. So I don't believe this requires legislative action. I don't believe that it should require any of that. But my experience sometimes in dealing with higher levels of government is they like to say you've got to wait for someone else to say it's okay. So my opinion, if we prod people and move them along, I think we can get an answer sooner than later. I hope.
I got to say that you know, this county thing is just, it's really a detriment, and it ties our hands to be able to do anything. I mean, this is very frustrating. I've been watching this for how many years have we been talking about this?
2.
I mean, well, too long.
Yeah.
2 years too long, you know, and I don't know what it's going to take. I don't know if we have to talk to the county executive, but you know, if there's a senior administrative staff that just has to check off the box because it's already state law, then you know, is a tail wagging the dog, and you know, it just seems totally silly to me, just really silly.
But I think now we have the support and the lobbying support of the county itself. I think now it's just someone at the state level has to say, yep, you're right. Go ahead. That's where it's at. But like the chief said, he'll be calling, I'll be calling, Stuart's calling. We're
Well,
not
hopefully
gonna,
Catherine Borges is calling.
right.
No, like she was at the meeting.
She was at the meeting.
Right, but I'm just saying that, you know, they had, meetings are nice.
Right.
That's great, but nothing got decided in the meeting, okay? And they basically kicked the can down the road. Oh, well, we'll still think about it. Well, you know, they've been thinking about it for 2 years because we've been asking for this. So it just seems silly.
So Tom, is there anything in his capital or any of the expenses, one-time occurrences that could just be switched over to the fund balance, so then we won't have to really worry about bumping against the
So
tax cap?
If I could just jump in there, I think that what we need is time to actually look at where we are with the budget to figure, and then predict what we're going to use for the end of the year before we really can make that determination. So we'll have a better answer for you. I don't think we're prepared to do that right now because we really have to say, all right, let's predict where we're at, and let's look at all the positions that didn't get filled and
Right, so
add that money up, and then we can come back to you and say that, you know, chief wants to buy this, and we can take it out of his money.
the timing of the budget has to be looked at realistically. We can't every year have surpluses. While I appreciate the hard work, we're in the middle of November. If you say shave off 2 months on the timing of his budget, it'll help. And you have to do that. I mean, you have to be realistic. You can't budget from January to December knowing that nothing's going to happen realistically till the middle of January, or to the end, or to the middle of February, because on these budgets, you know, if you could shave off 6 weeks as you amortize these things, it's a big difference on the tax cap if we do that for every department that's sitting with a fill-in position that you know is not happening. And if it does, you'll make up for it later because you have that opportunity. I thought where Quantel was also going is what do we have in 2018 that we can charge rather than 2019? Anything on
Exactly.
these budgets, and that
But
you're going to do
That's
as we go through all of this,
Yes.
and maybe find some dollars that way too.
yes.
Right, but I
Okay.
mean, there are these tangible things that that all of the small items that wouldn't be bonded anyway when you're talking about, you know, servers and plate readers and
Well, those aren't.
Literally
Those are
the
from
sort of-
prior years.
Yeah, we're not. Yeah.
No servers and plate readers this year. That was from prior years.
Oh, you're right. I'm sorry. It's
Yeah.
just on the list here. But you know, whatever.
But-
the
but
ballistic
similarly,
vests, they
yes.
sorted these. So there's you know tens of thousands of dollars here in items that we could order next week if we decided we were paying for that 2018, right? So you
Right.
know
Or
what
we
those
do a
are.
carryover
You can
So
fund
you're
identify
going to look at
balance.
that.
those
right?
are easy to identify.
Because we already have a list of tentative carryover fund balance items, and then we'll just complete it as we go through these
Okay.
meetings.
So every department that starts in January, but realistically aren't going to fill some position or something till March, is going to end up really adding up across the board. So I think we do that as a regular process when we're done with all these meetings, but let's just make sure that we look at every single department and,
And-
where
and
the
I can
timing
ap-
can change. It's not really your department, it's his department, but I think Tom manages all the scenarios, so.
So I think there's a double-edged sword to that, because when we look at the total budgets over time, if you reduce a budget because you know you're not going to hire a staff person for 2 months or 3 months, and you reduce it by a third or a quarter, but you know that's a full-time position, when you go to budget the next year, then you have a lot bigger hurdle to overcome as far as filling your budget and looking at where we're at. With our tax cap being so tight, if you don't keep those monies in there and then roll it over, you're almost hurting yourself because it's not the right philosophy.
In a
It's
business
it's very
scenario,
tough.
if in a business scenario, that would be perfect. That's exactly what we do.
Right.
But
Well, in a
we're
business
constricted.
scenario, we would be budgeting for
Yeah,
3
but-
years and not 1 year.
But
So I
also,
get
if we're
that.
talking about raising people's taxes, collecting taxes for a position we know we aren't going to fill till June isn't appropriate. So we should budget for the staff that we plan to hire for the time that we plan to hire them. But that's not what we're talking about here. It's not relevant to this because at this point we could theoretically still be starting to pay people to be in the academy.
We're hoping to.
Right.
Right.
Okay.
Any other police questions? Anything else you want to leave us with?
No, I appreciate all the support that I always get. I mean, this is really it's a relatively easy process. You guys have been great with not me but the department, and we're grateful for the support in terms of finances, a statement of where your priorities are. So we really we appreciate that our programs get funded almost always, and we understand where sometimes they can't. But you know, we hope that we can be a part of keeping under the tax cap, and glad to be a part of it.
Yeah, I'll say last year one of the most not expensive but memorable items that we funded was the implicit bias training that you did, and that was something that was really different, and we were a real leader among departments across the region. And I'm just wondering, what was the feedback? What was the experience that the department felt they had?
It was good. It was an interesting conversation. You know, most importantly, it started a lot of conversation. So whether officers, you know, the expectation is always that you send somebody to training and they come back with what the training. You know, this isn't a training where we talk at you. It's a training where we talk with you. So even those officers who might have thought that they disagreed with the training, the conversations that are being had are that they understand it. And it made them think, and ultimately that's what we're doing. We're challenging people to think about things they might not otherwise consider. So my philosophy on this training is number one, implicit bias isn't an every year thing, but it's certainly something we're going to come back to again because I think a second evolution, once people have already seen it, would be really positive. That said, we try to do one big training evolution every year. So next year's large-scale training evolution is going to focus on active shooter with the incorporation of the other emergency services. So what we're looking to do next year is a week-long training where we get everybody inside of one of our schools. I hope Ray Sanchez is watching. And we want to incorporate fire and emergency service and emergency medical services there as well. Then the plan for 2020 is that we come back around and do something a little bit more philosophical in terms of whether it be implicit bias or some other concept. You know, we're always looking at what everybody else is doing, what's out there, and there are some really progressive departments on the West Coast that do some amazing stuff. So we're constantly watching them to see what they're putting in, and that's the goal. Is that 2020 we may come back with something similar yet different.
How was Orlando?
Orlando is fantastic. I'm really glad to present there. I was requested to come back for Chicago next year, so you know, getting on the speaking circuit for social media stuff and public information officers, and it's a lot of fun. But it's really a great opportunity to see not just the products because the trade show floor is there, but the informational setting that you get from the training and from the in-person trainings are really
What did you
phenomenal
speak
there.
about?
I did social media from scratch. It's startups for smaller departments across the country. Like 70% of police departments have 25 cops or less. So a lot of them struggle to get any information out to their constituents. So my class for this one was on how to get started, where to get started, pitfalls of it, policies and training, and how to get people into the program. For next year, I'm hoping to do the class that they'd asked me for next year is Finding Your Voice, which is sort of one of the unique things that we're known for, is that we communicate with people a little different than a lot of governments do. So the class that we're going to be rolling out next will be how to decide how you're going to communicate with your people in terms of what your tone would be.
And was that videotaped? Your,
No, mine wasn't. They videotaped some of the big name speakers. If you're nationally recognized at that point, they do. But
Oh, if there's CLEs involved, I know they do. But
yeah, there's a lot of classes going on all at the same time, and then there are a number of different tracks. So while I had 100 people attend my class, some of the classes are 500 people. You know, when the director of the FBI shows up, he fills an auditorium. So
you don't quite have that status.
I don't have that draw yet.
but,
We don't want people to know the Austin Police Department that well, so that's just fine.
In a positive way, we do.
That
For all different reasons, but sure.
but Chief, when this was a business trip, right? This was something you did.
Yes, that's right.
Okay. So could you take some equipment with you next time and get permission to film it, and then you could put it on ours if they
We
allow you
cannot.
to?
So we talked about that it's the International Association of Chiefs of Police, and you're not permitted to film any of the presenters while you're there. They select who's going to be filmed, and like I said, they keep it to the bigger names, and they use that for promotional purposes for them. But the presentations themselves are not usually published in whole.
Well, I was just gonna add to that. as an invitation, I would love, for our understanding, the public's understanding, if you could possibly maybe next year rework the presentation in a way that is adaptable to, local governments and residents understanding. Just, how,
It's virtually the same.
Yeah,
so if there's a
so-
group that wants to
but
hear
I would,
about it, I mean,
yeah.
I'm
I mean,
available for all
we,
of that.
we'd be pretty interested in learning how it went and how we're a model. So
Then at a work session,
I was thinking, connecting with Nikon, it's got the presentation.
And do you
Gets
also
us more high profile.
do you do secure? There's an increase for grants for security, and for local police to teach, like in school systems. I mean, I just sat through one where they fire different guns versus firecrackers versus because most people don't actually recognize the sound of gunshots unless you're familiar with them. So that it was done for teachers actually, and special needs teachers who have to be very sensitive to noise. So it was sort of an interesting. It was done by a police officer who I guess is retired and he's doing this thing now. So do you do any like programs like that for security for our school systems?
Yes.
Or any of that?
So we do, we do the active shooter training just the same as what we do for some of the staff here.
That's
We
what it's
offer a
called?
similar type of, it's response to active shooter. They go by various titles. I know that a lot of schools are hiring contractors. From what I hear from some other school districts, not necessarily ours, those contractors often come in and they'll give you an overview of what you should be doing in order to sell you the bigger product, which is constant
that's
training.
exactly right.
Right. So what we try to do, and we've done, so we train the library every year. We work with the school district and the teachers on this. We do seminars for all of them. We work with staff here. So we provide all of that. As far as grants, we haven't seen a grant to teach it, but we're generally doing it on staff time anyway. But we did work with the Chabad on Camp Woods Road on their security grants. We reviewed all their stuff and went through the process with them. So they got grants for cameras and added security to their facility. And anybody that comes to us for those purposes, we help them.
Right, but I think what you're saying is there could be grants available to help offset the staff time.
Yeah, we haven't seen those.
Yes.
If
I'm
you-
the interpreter,
if you-
interpret
if you
it.
know where that money
I
comes
gotta get
from,
more
we'll
coffee.
we'll take it all day. But we haven't.
It's the
yeah.
same as like,
I just think you're better than what I saw the other day.
Well, thank you.
No, and I think the public should know that it isn't just arresting people, and that police departments do lots of other things, and that we pay for them, and that's a good use of their money. But people don't actually know that. What they sit there and go, I called them, and because my neighbor did this, and they never showed up. Okay, I get that.
Mhm.
But this stuff is prevention, and it's fabulous. And I think you're better than the people I
Right.
saw.
And sometimes if you just
And there
get
are
a grant,
grants.
sometimes if you just get a grant, it's you get a lot more out of it than just the whatever $5,000 that you get for it. You get the Austin Police Department has
Sure.
been given a grant to do this special public safety thing. Everybody should look at the Austin Police Department. They're
Yeah.
the leader and look at all the great things they're doing.
Oh, well, I'm glad
If you know of where the grant came from, I mean, we'll certainly look into it
I'll
and apply
talk to
for
our
it.
grant writer, but it's the churches and synagogues have gotten because they don't fall into the school systems, and the schools are
Yep.
supposed to be getting it. On the other hand, there've been a lot of issues at churches and
Mhm.
synagogues, and so there have been some grants, 20,000, 25. But as you know about grants, it's not easy, and it becomes a job in and of itself. But yeah, I'll start looking at it. But I think you qualify actually in many ways. And if you're doing one group, and if we have 22 spiritual houses, and you did one because
Well, we
it's
did.
Why can't we multiply it to others?
We did last weekend or the weekend before, we did training for all of the Briarcliff Austin Ministerial Association. They actually came to headquarters and we met with all of them. We've gone to St. Augustine's and met with them and some of their school staff. So we make the rounds and all of that. But certainly, if there was a way to sort of more formalize that and make it a larger program,
Okay.
we're always willing.
We are 20 minutes.